You hit the power button on your computer. And then what? Ever really thought about it? What's going on in those few seconds before you see your desktop? It kind of feels like magic, right? Well, today, we're going to pull back the curtain on that magic. Let's demystify one of the most crucial but kind of overlooked things your PC does, the Windows boot sequence. Yeah, it's one of those things you never think about until it doesn't work, right? But here's the thing. If you understand this process, you suddenly have the power to fix some of the most annoying computer problems out there. So, let's put on our detective hats and start this diagnostic journey from the very, very beginning. Okay, so the instant you press that button, and I mean the instant, long before Windows even has a clue what's happening, your computer's hardware has to wake up and do a quick check-in. This very first step has a name. It's called the POST, which stands for Power On Self-Test. You can totally think of the POST as your computer's morning routine. You know, it's stretching its digital arms and legs, making sure the memory's all there, the hard drives are spinning up, basically checking that all the important bits and pieces are present and accounted for. If everything's good, you'll usually hear a single happy little beep. But if something's wrong, you might get a whole sequence of angry, cryptic beeps. That's your hardware literally screaming for help before Windows even gets a chance to load. All right, so the hardware check is done. Everything's A-okay? Now, the computer's firmware has to do its next big job, find the operating system. And you know, the way computers have done this has really changed over the years. There are basically two main ways this can happen, two paths to your desktop. And this is where things get really interesting, the old way versus the new way. For like decades, computers used something called BIOS. It would just scan the very, very first tiny part of the hard drive for something called the master boot record, or MBR. Super simple, but also kind of dumb and rigid. Today, pretty much every modern computer uses UEFI. It's way, way smarter. Instead of just looking at one tiny spot, it reads a whole map of the drive, called the GPT, to find a special little area called the EFI system partition. That's where all the important boot manager files live. It's just a better system all around, more secure, more flexible, and it lets you use those huge hard drives we have now. Okay, so the firmware has found the starting line. Its job is pretty much over. Now, it's time for the big handoff, passing the baton from the low-level hardware stuff to the actual operating system software. And that's where the bootloader comes into play. The bootloader is like the most critical bridge in this whole process. It's the very first piece of Windows software to run, and it has one single, incredibly important mission: to go find and load the kernel. And the kernel? That's the absolute core of the operating system. It's the brain of the whole operation. And here's how that handoff actually works. It's a whole chain of command. First up, you've got the Windows Boot Manager, BOTMGR for short. That kicks things off. It immediately looks at a file called the Boot Configuration Data, or BCD. Think of the BCD as a treasure map that tells it exactly where your Windows installation is hiding. Once it finds it, it fires up winload.exe. Now, winload is the real workhorse here. It's the one that hauls the kernel, that big brain of the OS, and something called the hardware abstraction layer into your computer's memory. And once that happens, boom, Windows is efficiently starting to wake up. But, of course, this whole delicate dance, it can break. And when it does, you get that heart-stopping moment where your computer just won't start. So now that we know how it's supposed to work, let's switch gears and talk about what to do when it all goes wrong. I'm sure you've seen this before, or something like it. That terrifying black screen with just a few cold, unhelpful words. Ugh. When you see this, it almost always means that somewhere in that handoff sequence we just talked about, the chain got broken. Maybe the MBR got scrambled, or that BCD map file is just gone. But hey, don't panic. Windows actually has a super powerful tool built right in for exactly this kind of disaster. You just have to get to the Windows recovery environment to use it. It's a little command line tool called bootrec.exe. That's short for boot recovery. And trust me, this is your absolute first responder in any startup emergency. Now check this out. This table is basically your diagnostic cheat sheet. It connects the problem you're seeing to the exact command that can fix it. So let's say you think the master boot record is messed up, maybe from a virus or something. You'd use /fixmbr. Getting that missing boot manager error, your go-to is /fixboot. And for that classic operating system not found message, /rebuildbcd is your hero. It'll scan all your drives, find Windows, and literally rebuild that map for the bootloader. It is so, so powerful. Okay, so fixing a broken computer is one thing, and that's awesome. But what about getting ahead of the game? How can you manage and diagnose your startup before everything goes haywire? let's take a look at how you can really take command of the boot process. For that, we're going to turn to another old-school Windows tool, msconfig.exe. It's the system configuration utility. Now, this isn't something you'd mess with every day, but for troubleshooting, oh yeah, it's an absolutely essential part of the toolkit. It gives you control over how Windows starts up. So with msconfig, you can do something called a diagnostic startup. It'll load Windows with just the bare essentials. No extra programs or drivers. This is perfect for figuring out if some random software you installed is causing a problem. But what's maybe even more useful is that you can use it to force your PC to reboot into safe mode. Why is that so great? Well, if you've got a bad driver that's making Windows crash on startup, you can jump into safe mode, get rid of that faulty driver, and poof, your system is back in business. So let's do a quick flyby of everything we've covered. It all kicks off with that post-hardware check. Then, the modern UEFI firmware finds the boot files using that GPT map. That launches the Windows bootloader, which then goes and loads the kernel. If any part of that chain breaks, Bootrec is your go-to repair tool. And if you're hunting down a tricky software problem, msconfig is how you take control of the startup and get into safe mode. See? Not so mysterious after all. So there you have it. From that single push of a button to a fully loaded desktop, it's this incredibly complex but cool dance between hardware and software. And now you don't just understand how it works, you actually have the tools to fix it when it breaks. That knowledge is a game changer. It takes you from just being a user to being a real troubleshooter. So the only question left is, what system mystery are you going to solve next?